Hi there, I'm Fred Trost. I'd like to welcome you to this edition of Michigan Weekend. You know, for all practical purposes, most of hunting season is over, except for maybe some rabbit hunting that's left. So for this show, we're going to hang up our guns and we're going to go fishing. Now, we're not going to go ice fishing. We're not going to fish through the ice. We're going to fish in the streams for steelhead trout. We're going to be going with a couple real experts, too. Jim Bedford and John Hesse from Lansing are noted for their skills in using spinners in the streams, especially in the winter for steelhead, and we're going to catch a few. Also, we're going to learn a recipe that is just outstanding for steelhead called baked trout, sure to light up the eyes of that little lady in your life. We're going to be right back to talk about winter fishing in just a minute, but first, here's a word from the Sporting Goods Department at Meijer. This week, the Sporting Goods Department at Meijer has bowling balls on sale. Top quality balls in 5 colors, available in 10, 12, 14, and 16 pounds. The Why Pay More price of $18.88 includes fitting and drilling, and your ball will be personalized with your initials at no extra cost. And check out the Gladding bowling ball bags, marked way down to $3.97, available in a variety of colors. And these high-quality AMF shoes are $2 off this week, a good price, as usual, at Meijer Thrifty Acres. Now, just for old time's sake, let's look over some of the trophy fish that have been taken this past summer, which qualified for the Master Angler Awards from the DNR. Ken Baker took a largemouth bass fishing Clear Lake, St. Joe County, 7 pounds, 4 ounces. Wouldn't you like to catch that one? Here, look at this Chinook salmon caught by David M. off Lake Michigan, off Mason County, 33 pounds, 12 ounces. Here's an inland brown trout. This was caught in the Boardman River in Grand Traverse County by Raymond Minervini. And we have here a Lake Huron brown trout. Jimmy Birmingham caught that up in Thunder Bay, Lake Huron, off Alpena County. Boy, that is a beaut. Now, a lot of these fish that we've just been looking at, you really can't catch too well during the winter. But here's a fish that you can, with tip-ups anyway. This is a walleye. C.B. Thompson took this 10-pound, 14-ouncer, casting with a Mr. Twister in the Manistee Lake off Manistee County. And here we have a fish that can be caught readily in the winter, rainbow trout, actually a steelhead, caught by Kevin Schippa. He's a charter boat captain down in Holland, and he took this in Lake Michigan off Allegan County. Now, of all the fish we have in the Great Lakes, a tremendous variety of fish, we're going to be talking right now about steelhead trout. Now, this is a steelhead, lives down in the depths in the Great Lakes most of the time. You notice it has that pink stripe down its side. Well, it's like a rainbow trout. It would be a rainbow trout if this fish stayed in the stream all its life. Now, the rainbows that come down the rivers into the Great Lakes, they eat an awful lot. They get very large, and we call them steelhead trout. They go back into the streams to spawn. Now, some of the fish, even though the spawning run is in the spring, some of the fish have returned already in the fall, early, and they can be caught now. Now, some of the best streams, here we have the St. Joe River. Some people say this could be the best steelhead stream in the state, all the way up to Berrien Springs Dam. Oh, the Muskegon River up to Newaygo is a good place to catch steelhead. Moving up here, the Pere Marquette is another good one. The Betsy River on both sides of US 131 is usually open during these frigid winter temperatures. The Platte, of course, especially from Platte Lake down to Lake Michigan at this time of year. Now, moving over to the east side of the state, we can go to Sheboygan. You can catch steelhead up to the dam in town. Moving over here to Thunder Bay, Alpena, you can also catch them Thunder Bay River up to the dam in town. Now, moving down to Oscoda, the Au River, famous trout stream, good steelhead fishing all the way up to Foot Dam. These are just some of the good steelhead streams. Right now, let's find out what it's like to go steelhead fishing in the winter. You wouldn't think that there'd be any fishermen who were so enthusiastic about their sport that they'd brave the wind and sleet and snow just to fish. But there are a few. Now, the 2 dedicated fishermen that I fished with on this blustery winter day were John Hesse and Jim Bedford, both steelhead fishing experts from Lansing. Now, what do you wear on a day like this? Well, I'll tell you what I wore. I wore 3 pairs of socks, a pair of fishnet long johns, covered with a pair of waffle weave long johns, a pair of corduroys over that, then my waders. Up top it was a fishnet shirt covered with a long-sleeved waffle weave undershirt, then a flannel shirt, a sweatshirt, an old ski sweater on top of that, and a good warm jacket with a hood. I used a knit hat to keep my ears warm, a pair of knit gloves, a pair of spare mittens, and a scarf. Believe me, I wasn't overdressed. I was comfortable though. A 15-minute hike through the snow finally brought us to the banks of our steelhead stream. Now, this is a favorite of Jim's and John's, so I'm not going to, reveal exactly where we are right now. I've told you a few of the better steelhead streams in the state, so pick from those. Now, both Jim and John are spinner fishermen. They use spinner lures that flash as they're retrieved, imitating silvery minnows that dash and dart in the current. Now, John prefers using a closed-faced spinning reel and no gloves if it's warm enough. Of course, it's really never warm in January, but he prefers the feel of not wearing gloves, having more control, sensitivity in his hands. Now, Jim Bedford, on the other hand, prefers an open-faced spinning reel, and he almost never wears gloves, even in the most frigid weather. Now, if that isn't the sign of a die-hard steelhead fisherman, I don't know what is. You know, there are fish to be caught in these frigid waters. It's not only exciting sport, but it really is a beautiful time of year as long as you're dressed to enjoy it. And we're going to be right back to pick up our fishing trip and catch some steelhead after this message from the Sporting Goods Department at Meijer. You know, a lot of people ask me, they say, do you really buy your sporting goods at Meijer? Well, you bet I do, and I'll tell you why. Okay, first of all, they have name brand merchandise. Sporting Goods Department has a huge selection, and Meijer has the lowest prices you're going to find. And another thing, you know, if you get to know the Meijer people in the Sporting Goods Department, you're going to find that they're really nice. Well, I did all my Christmas shopping at Meijer. Of course, I know what I'm looking for in sporting goods, and, well, if you know what you want, why pay more? Now let's get back on the stream. We had this chase after the steelhead trout, a real trophy, especially in the middle of the winter. And fishing in the middle of the winter is popular outdoor sport in Michigan, even though most fishermen do it through the ice, usually on an inland lake. On the Great Lakes or Grand Traverse Bay, Saginaw Bays are popular spots. But stream fishing, using the fall and spring fishing techniques, can be very productive if the streams aren't frozen over. Right here, John Hesse is sliding over shelf ice. That's ice that's attached to the shore and extends partway into the river. If the shelf ice is fairly thick, no problem. But you never know if that shelf ice is going to support your weight or dump you in. That's one reason it's always a good idea to fish with a pal. This type of fishing is just like you do in the fall or spring, slowly wading upstream, casting towards the submerged logs and brush, bringing your lure by the pockets and eddies and behind rocks and in the deeper holes where those steelhead are lurking. Now, fish don't like to expend a lot of energy battling the current if it isn't necessary, especially in the winter when their metabolism is lower. So they'll be behind obstructions out of the fast-moving current. And in this cold water, steelhead just won't go too far to hit a lure. You have to work the lures in close to where they lie if you want to entice them into taking a crack at your lure. Now, in this river, you can see where the water levels have receded over the past few weeks. Ice had formed around this clump of trees midstream, and as the water levels fell, new ice formed at a lower level. This handiwork of nature really is intricate and beautiful. In the winter, it's just like walking through Mother Nature's art gallery, and that's, I guess, one side benefit of winter fishing. Not many people get out to these streams to see the wildlife and ice formations, and of course that's another benefit, the solitude. Every now and then you'll see the remains of a coho or Chinook salmon that has completed its life cycle and is naturally decaying there on the stream bottom. Salmon only live to be 3 or 4 years old, and it's their destiny to die after spawning. But steelhead, which are found in the same rivers and streams where you find salmon, don't die after spawning. If they're lucky, they'll be back several years in a row to spawn, and they're an exciting fish to catch. Steelhead are an unusual fish in that they're basically a rainbow trout, but for some reason this strain of rainbow trout migrates to the Great Lakes, just like the salmon. And like the salmon, they grow to 5, maybe 10 pounds before returning to their home stream to spawn. But unlike salmon, they don't die after spawning, and unlike salmon, they usually spawn in the spring, not in the fall. But for some reason, about 20 or 30% maybe of the steelhead come up the spawning streams in the fall, and they spend the winter here waiting for the waters to warm in March and April. That will trigger their spawning activity. Maybe you've heard that salmon and steelhead trout don't eat while they're in the streams on their spawning runs. Well, that's correct most of the time. You'll rarely find a steelhead trout with food in its stomach while it's in a river. But the logical question is, why do they hit a lure? Well, who knows? Fisheries biologists are as baffled by this as anyone. It appears that they strike because they're aggravated by an intruding fish, even if it looks like a small one. They don't really intend to eat it. But then why will they also pick up spawn bags or eggs or other natural baits? Well, who knows? Evidently, it's just a bad habit they got into in the days when they used to be hungry. And in any case, even though they are feeding, while they're in the streams or aren't feeding, they will hit lures and baits, and that's good enough for most fishermen. Well, I hope all this doesn't look too easy. There are problems with winter fishing. Here we have Jim snagged in the brush, but he's been snagged in the brush so many times he doesn't lose patience. He knows how to work it loose. But he also knows this river like the back of his hand, and he knows where most of the snags are. And of course, his casting technique is a highly polished art. Now, John Hesse is aware of the hazards of shelf ice as he walks towards the bank. Look at that, on the lower left. Frozen guides on your fishing rod are another difficulty, especially on the colder days when they might ice up after only 2 or 3 casts. There's really only one way to solve this. Put the guide in your mouth and melt the ice. Seems to be the quickest and most efficient way, especially on the smaller guides. The largest guides, it's relatively simple to break the ice out with your fingers. Now, you can also use your mouth to hold spare parts for your reel if you need to stop streamside and make a few repairs. John had a little difficulty with his reel freezing up, but you can tell he's an experienced fisherman because he carries spare parts along with the tools he needs to make the repairs. Now, here's an age-old problem to fishermen. You've hooked the bottom. Now, if you play it just right, you might be able to pull loose and get your lure back. On the other hand, it might be a lost cause, you never know. So here's a rare shot coming up. You're going to see a fisherman whose lure is snagged on the bottom while his waders are snagged in a tree. Gotta hand it to Jim Bedford. In weather like this, he still doesn't lose his cool, even though he loses his lure. But with Jim, and John for that matter, there are a lot more lures where that came from. Both fellows are serious spinner fishermen. They lose a lot of spinners in the brush, so they buy the components in large quantities, make their own spinners for only a fraction of what they'd pay if they bought their spinners packaged. Jim and John both keep meticulous records of their fishing trips. Last year, Jim Bedford logged over 250 hours. That's in the water fishing for steelhead. He caught 66. Well, that's a darn good average, as good as you'll find anywhere. And right now you're watching exactly how he does it. Well, now the score is 2-1. Jim Bedford has 2 steelhead on his stringer. John Hesse has 1. But before Jim could get his line back in the water, there was a cry of fish on, and now John has his hands full. Well, it could have been that Jim's hands were cold. His first netting attempt came up empty, but a second try netted a beautiful steelhead that any fisherman would be proud to take home. Now, this particular day did turn rather cold. When we got into the stream at 8:30 in the morning, the temperature was close to 30 degrees, but during the day we saw 2 or 3 inches of snowfall. We felt the winds kick up, and by 4 in the afternoon, the temperature was only 10 degrees. We decided we'd had enough for one day on the river. But we did have 5 nice steelhead to show for the effort. Now, I know you only see 4 here. Well, John caught a 5th one just before we left, and it just so happened that this photographer had put his camera in the car before that 5th one was caught. But as I recall, and I think Jim will bear out, that it was a huge one. Now, if you think you might have cold feet about winter fishing and all of the great activities we have here in the winter in Michigan, listen to this from the shoe department at Meyer Thrifty Acres. Nobody likes to get their feet wet outdoors, and the answer is to wear waterproof boots if you have to go through water. Check out these men's felt pack boots this week in the shoe department at Meyer. Now, the sole gives good grip on ice and snow. The entire boot is rubber, which means no water is going to soak through. And inside, there's a felt pack. It's warm, it's replaceable, and you can take it out to dry if your feet get wet from perspiration. Listen to the price, $10.94 a pair this week. That's why they say, why pay more at Meyer Thrifty Acres? Now it's time to get out your pencil and a piece of paper, write down the ingredients for this recipe. It's called baked trout. Now, this happens to be a trout that was caught by Jim Bedford on a spinner. It's a medium-sized steelhead, and he caught it in his favorite unnamed stream. Now, besides the fish, you're going to need 3 or 4 slices of bacon, at least a cup and a half of stale breadcrumbs, maybe even 2 cups, a little bit of onion and green pepper, which we'll chop up. Need some salt and some pepper, and some aluminum foil. You're probably going to want to put this inside your baking dish. Now, when we look at the instructions that we had in our Michigan Weekend recipe booklet last spring, it said very clearly, dress the trout or coho for baking. Now, dress the trout, that makes you wonder, would a cute little shirt be appropriate? Maybe how about a little pair of green slacks, or maybe something larger like a dress? Yeah, a pink sweater. Well, no, that'd be too hot in the oven. Say, how about this sharp little jumpsuit? Looks to be about the right size. I don't know. You know, I think it'd be better just to leave the fish in its birthday suit. Besides, it doesn't even fit in the baking dish. That's when you have to call in a karate expert, a blue belt in this case, to lop off the head and the tail in 1, or maybe 2 fell swoops. See, 2 fell swoops is when one doesn't do the job. It's actually a rather sloppy karate technique. But anyway, moving on to the next step, we'll prepare the stuffing. Now, the stuffing calls for about 1.5 cups, maybe 2 cups of stale breadcrumbs. Now, to this, we'll add about 1/2 tablespoon of chopped bacon. Take a small onion, cut it in half, and chop it. So 1/2 of a small chopped onion, then sprinkle in about 1/2 teaspoon or so of chopped green pepper. Then it's 1/4 teaspoon of salt and a few shakes of pepper. Stir this mixture all together, and that's the stuffing. Now, when I talk about stuffing a trout, I realize a lot of outdoorsmen immediately think of taxidermy. I think you might be able to hang this up on the wall, but it'll get mighty ripe after a few days. Some people have, I think, confused my cooking at times with taxidermy. It's been said that the only difference between my stuffed trout and the taxidermist is that mine doesn't last. But the taste is similar. I don't think so at all. I think if you try this recipe, you'll love it. So we'll put the breadcrumbs in there. And we'll just have to let our pretty little lady friend be the judge of how good this actually tastes. So there we cover it with some bacon, and we have it all ready to go in the oven. Wrap that foil around it. Now, on a salmon, the dry stuffing will absorb the oils as it cooks. But here on the trout, to keep the skin moist, put plenty of bacon on it. Put it in the oven for at least 30 minutes, depending on the size, about 375 degrees, basting it frequently. And I want to tell you, Especially you fellas, this recipe's a great one to use when you want to impress that little lady friend. It's easy to do, and even the most beautiful woman will wait patiently for that succulent catch to come out of the oven. Serve it with a tossed salad, crisp and fresh, maybe some French-style green beans. Now we'll get a little wild rice on the side. Oh boy, you really have a meal. The fish will be so tender, it'll come right off the bones, and probably your little lady friend will snatch up those little pieces of bacon while you're putting the fish on her plate. And now I might suggest a good white wine with this fish. Well, in this case, it's homogenized. But there's really no point in me trying to convince you how good this tastes. Let's just watch the little lady try it and see if she likes it. Well, there it is, the recipe for baked trout. It works also very well with salmon, equally good for both, and for sure it's going to be a hit with your lady friend. And if you prepared the rest of the meal to match the fish, there's no doubt that, like a good girl, she'll clean up her plate. That's it, baked trout. Now we're going to be back for the end of the show in just 1 minute after this message from the Sporting Goods Department at Meijer. The big 3/4-inch wheel-away playback table tennis table is $5 off this week at Meijer. But this model, made from half-inch heavy-duty particle board, is an even better deal this week, $10 off, marked down to only $39.88. It has a non-glare green finish, 1-inch tubular steel legs with 2-inch swivel casters. At that price, you can't go wrong. Also, check out the 4-player table tennis set. Paddles, balls, post, and a net, all for only $4.44. Table tennis equipment on sale this week in the Sporting Goods Department at Meijer Thrifty Acres. There's still a lot of fishing in Michigan. We have lots of fish. Many can be caught in the winter. Of course, our steelhead in the streams. Generally, the trouts and the salmon, there's not too much happening, but look for the ice to freeze up off Harrisville, and you might be able to catch some through the ice. Of course, bass season is over. But some of the favorite ice fish are northern pike and walleye. A place like Houghton Lake is great to use tip-ups. Of course, the bluegill as well. Awful lot of fishing to be done. I hope you can get outdoors this weekend. It's a great place to be. See you right here next week.